case you didn't know, Funimation has live-action films on their site. What? That's not anime. I know, absolutely crazy. But that does raise the question, which ones are worth watching? I'm so glad you asked. Let me take you through the weird world that is the catalog of live-action films on Funimation. Our first stop is the few films adapting manga. Probably the best would be the Rurouni Kenshin films. Films 2 and 3 are currently still on the site. However, Nobuhiro Watsuki still owns and profits off the IP. So those movies are now the worst movies and are not worth watching because fuck Nobuhiro Watsuki. But how about Space Battleship Yamato? It's good. It has good special effects, the casting is good, and the strength of its core story shines through. I do, however, think it's probably not the best way to experience the story, as even though it's one of the longest films among his peers, it still kept giving me a feeling that it's cutting parts of the story out. Again, I have no familiarity with the original series, so I could be talking out of my ass, but I'm going on a gut feeling that some of these characters were further built upon than they were in the film. Again, I want to reiterate that I do think this film is good. I simply just think that it shows some of the limits of the medium, as films are kind of limited to how long they can go if they want to be appreciated by a general audience. I would say Space Battleship Yamato is tentatively worth watching. Maybe I'll get more familiar with the series sometime and revisit this part of the review. At least for Space Battleship Yamato, it's not alone with this issue, as the other two manga-based films also suffer from the issue of cuts, but quite a few other issues as well. Higanjima and Smuggler both take forever to set up everything and get their actual plots moving. That results in Higanjima rushing through the third act and Smuggler losing steam in the second act. Higanjima also has a fair share of lackluster characters and really starts to fall apart once they escape the vampire jail in the second act. As for Smuggler, it does set up the protagonist and the antagonist well, but getting to the point where the two crossed is an absolute slog. Of the two, I think Smuggler is the better shot and directed film, but neither are worth watching. But of the two, Smuggler at least has a bit more soul, if that means anything to you. Another common type of films to make it to the site are loose historical films, films loosely based on a historical time or person, but not exactly historically accurate. A lot of these have some really good set designs, costuming, and adhering to the time frame of what they're covering. The only issue is that nearly all of them are boring as sin and are simply just fine. Nothing to really talk about, just a film. This includes Shinobi, Confucius, Mulan, Rise of a Warrior, The Woman Knight of Mirror Lake, The Sword with No Name, and Gomon. Obviously, none of them are worth watching, but I will give The Sword of No Name the award of being the least bland of this set. But I left out two films in this category to talk about. One of these is Her Majesty, a New Zealand film that somehow ended up on the site. Like, it's the basic racism is bad film. The G-rated stuff you would see in elementary or middle school. It's not exactly worth watching if you want a more nuanced look into the British exploitation of the New Zealand natives. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but the most interesting part is the fact that it is actually on the site at all. The other film is IP Mon, The Legend is Born, about the titular IP Mon. The film takes a much younger IP Mon and explores its version of his backstory. I do feel its second act is a bit disconnected, but the action is great and it eventually rubs it back in during the third act to create a satisfying film. So I say that it's worth watching for those who enjoy kung fu films. Now that leaves 6 films that didn't fall into either category. One of those is Street Fighter's Assassin's Fist, which is very good if you're into Street Fighter. Had a nice balance of taking the story seriously and sneaking in jokes about its lore, such as the joke about Dan Hibiki. It develops both Ryu and Ken's shared backstory well, and is overall a good time that is worth watching, as long as you give yourself some intermissions, as this movie is over 2.5 hours long. But we move on to the film that tried so hard, but just failed to succeed. That is City Under Siege. It tries to be a fun action film with a bit of a comedic hero, but it just isn't written well enough. Its main character just isn't funny, and its attempts at humor just all fall flat. The action is fine, but the second act where we gotta deal with the main character getting a love interest really drags the pace between these action scenes, making it another film that is not worth watching. It is, however, better than Athena, Goddess of War, a spy police flick that left both me and my friend, who I watched all these films with, confused, as it kept refusing to build upon any of its characters and their goals for the longest time, instead just focusing on cool action scenes. Maybe us asking if this was a tie-in movie or something, but obviously it's not worth watching. Now we have the two comedies, Robo Gesha and Aliens vs. Ninjas, the latter of which longtime fans might remember I briefly covered in my Uchitama and Tamayomi review, where I basically said if you like knowingly campy films, you'll enjoy this film, and if not, you won't, which basically still rings true. But I do think I will be more confident in saying that it is in fact worth watching, given that same condition. I will also even say that it was my favorite film of the marathon. As for Robo-Gesha, it definitely falls in the same vein, a bit of camp and some very funny moments. However, it really starts to overstay its welcome, especially in the third act, so I can't say it's exactly worth watching. That leaves the film that left the most impact on my watching partner, Switch. Switch is absolutely one of the worst films I've ever seen, but it's so bad in a very interesting way. Just so many scenes that add nothing to the plot, but were simply done because someone thought it would be a cool set piece. The plot is all over the place. It feels like an AI was given 1,000 spy films and was told to auto-generate a script. If there are any moments of downtime, the movie just throws in either a set piece or a gaggle of sexy spy babes. It has to be seen to be believed. And if that sounds appealing to you, you may just ironically enjoy Switch. I won't be saying it's worth watching because it's garbage, but as they say, one person's garbage is another person's treasure.